Heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they wear blue hoodies and carry the quiet burden of a world that has already decided what they are before they open their mouths. On a gray Saturday afternoon in Savannah, Georgia, Paul Patton didn't stop to think before he ran toward the sound of screaming. An 8-year-old girl was trapped inside an overturned vehicle on the coastal parkway grass. The frame buckled, the fuel line bleeding, the sky pressing down like a lid. He punched through the window with his bare fist, reached through broken glass, and pulled Emma Cole from what would have been her grave. He saved her life while his hands split open and bled. But when Officer Douglas S.E. pulled up, squad car rolling slow, lights cutting through the gray afternoon, mind already made up before his boots touched the grass. He didn't see a man cradling a sobbing child. He saw a black man in a hoodie standing over a white girl at the scene of a wreck. He saw a problem that needed to be controlled. Within 2 minutes, Paul Patton went from hero to suspect. Hands wrenched behind his back. Hood yanked forward over his face. Pressed down onto the open lawn while the girl he'd just saved screamed his name into the coastal wind, and 3 separate phones pressed record in the crowd. Arrested for suspicious behavior. Cuffed with blood still drying on his knuckles from the window he'd shattered to save her life. Officer Douglas S.A.E. thought he was doing his job. He thought his badge made him right. He thought his department would protect him the way it always had. He was wrong, because Paul Patton wasn't just a man with a story. He was a man whose story would be seen by 18 million people before sunrise. A man who would find a civil rights attorney within 48 hours. A man who would walk into a federal courtroom and walk out with $8.8 million and Douglas S.A.E.'s career in ashes. This is the story of what happens when a system built to protect decides instead to punish, and what happens when the man it punishes refuses to be quiet. When heroism is answered with humiliation, and when justice doesn't come easy, but it does come. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button right now. This story has turns that are going to leave you stunned, and you don't want to miss a single one. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every one of them. Stories like this need witnesses. Truth needs an audience. Now let's get into it. Savannah, Georgia in October sits under a particular kind of sky, low, gray, and swollen. The kind of overcast that makes the coastal grass look almost luminescent and turns the water of the nearby parkway the color of old steel. It isn't cold. Not yet. But the warmth has gone out of the air, leaving behind a damp heaviness that settles into your shoulders and makes you want to be somewhere indoors. On the afternoon of October 11th at 2:19 p.m., the temperature was 61 degrees Fahrenheit and falling, the clouds moving in off the Atlantic in slow, deliberate sheets. Paul Patton was 31 years old. He stood 6 feet 0 inches, broad through the shoulders, with locks pulled back behind his neck and a jawline that hadn't seen a razor in a week. He worked as a warehouse logistics supervisor for a regional freight company, a job that required him to be everywhere at once and trusted by nobody until he proved himself, which he had 3 times over. He'd run track at Savannah State, the kind of sprinter whose body still remembered how, even 6 years removed from competition. Today he wore a blue zip-up hoodie over a gray V-neck, dark jeans, and white sneakers that were about to have a very bad afternoon. Paul had driven out to the coastal parkway on his lunch break for no dramatic reason. Just to eat a sandwich somewhere that wasn't his desk, to watch the water, to call his younger sister Kezia back about something she'd texted him that morning. The park was quiet on a weekday October afternoon. A few dog walkers, a retired man doing slow laps on the path, a mother pushing a stroller near the far end of the lot. Paul parked, unwrapped his food, leaned against his car with one foot propped on the bumper, and scrolled through his phone while the gray sky pressed down and the water moved in slow, indifferent swells. He heard the impact before he saw anything. It wasn't a boom, it was a crunch, the specific sound of metal folding that you can't mistake for anything else once you've heard it. A low, dense, structural wrench that travels through the ground as much as the air. Paul's head came up. His sandwich went down. 40 yards up the Parkway access road, a white Ford SUV was on its side in the grass. The driver's side folded inward, steam already beginning to push from somewhere under the hood. A second vehicle, a pickup, was fishtailing out of the lot. Hit and run. Gone. And from inside the overturned SUV came a sound that made every other thought in Paul Patton's brain go silent. A child screaming. Not crying. Screaming. The specific, airless pitch of a small person in complete terror, the kind of sound that doesn't compute as background noise, that fires something older than reason in anyone who hears it. Paul was already moving before the echo finished. His legs remembered sprinting. The 40 yards disappeared in seconds, his sneakers chewing up the Parkway grass, his arms pumping, his eyes locked on the rear window of the overturned vehicle where a small figure was visible, thrashing against a seatbelt, suspended sideways in a booster seat. A woman was already at the car. She was pulling at the door handle with both hands, her voice fracturing. Emma, baby, I'm here. I can't get it open. The doors were jammed. The impact had buckled the frame, killing the power, sealing the child inside. Thin gray smoke was beginning to curl through the dashboard vents. Get back, Paul said, and his voice came out level, focused. The part of him that spent every workday solving problems under pressure had locked in, and fear was somewhere behind a closed door. He grabbed the rear door handle himself. Jammed solid. He circled to the undercarriage side. Also jammed. The smoke through the vents was thickening. He could see Emma's face clearly now. 8 years old, eyes huge, cheeks wet, mouth forming words he couldn't hear through the glass. Paul unzipped his hoodie and wrapped the sleeve around his right fist. He hit the rear passenger window once. The glass starred but held. Twice. A hairline crack. 3 times. On the 4th impact, the window exploded inward. A shower of pebbled safety glass across the interior, and Paul reached through the frame without stopping, ignoring the jagged teeth of the window channel dragging across his forearm and the back of his hand. He found the seat belt buckle. The metal was hot. He pressed the release. The belt snapped free. I've got you, Paul said, his voice going in through the window, steady as he could make it. I've got you. Don't move, let me do it. Ready? Emma Cole nodded. 8 years old, trapped, terrified, and she still nodded. Paul got both arms through the window frame, took her under the armpits and pulled. The window channel scraped a long line up his forearms as he hauled her through the opening. He stumbled backward onto the grass and went down to one knee. Emma pressed against his chest and held on. She was shaking. He held on tighter. Her mother was there in an instant, dropping to the grass beside them, arms wrapping around her daughter from behind. All 3 of them locked together on the coastal lawn, while the SUV's engine compartment fully ignited 20 feet away. A rolling wall of orange that filled the windows and sent black smoke straight up into the gray Savannah sky. Another 60 seconds inside that car and Emma Cole would not have come out breathing. Paul sat back on the grass and looked at his hands. They were shredded. His right forearm had a deep gash running from wrist to mid-forearm where the window frame had caught him. His knuckles on both hands were split and bleeding freely. The skin folded back, blood soaking into the cuff of his gray V-neck. The hoodie was somewhere on the ground behind him. He was breathing hard, staring at the damage with a kind of detached calm that comes when adrenaline is still running the show and pain hasn't gotten clearance to land yet. You saved her, Emma's mother said. Her name was Carol Cole, and she was looking at Paul the way people look at something they can't fully believe is real. You saved my daughter. She was, thank you. Please, God, thank you. Paul looked up from his hands and managed something close to a nod. And then the sirens came. The Savannah Fire Department arrived first, 2 engines, 1 ambulance. moving with the compressed efficiency of people who do this for a living. Firefighters swarmed the Ford with suppressant, drowning the engine fire in white foam while it was still small enough to die. A paramedic reached Paul within 30 seconds, crouching in front of him on the grass, eyes on his arms. "Sir, let me see those." She reached for his wrists with gloved hands. Paul held them out. The pain was starting to arrive now, the adrenaline stepping back and letting reality through. A hot, spreading throb in both hands, a sharper burn up his forearm. "You're going to need stitches," the paramedic said, already working. "Quite a few." "He saved her," Carol Cole said from 5 feet away, loudly enough for everyone present to hear. The doors were jammed. He punched through the window with his hand. He pulled her out himself. The paramedic looked at Paul. Paul looked at his hands. Around them, a crowd of 8 or 9 bystanders had gathered on the parkway grass. Dog walkers, the retired jogger, a man with a coffee cup who had come running from the parking lot. Several of them had their phones out. Several of them had been recording for the last 3 minutes. Nobody was looking at Paul Patton like he was a suspect. Not yet. That was still 60 seconds away. And it was pulling into the lot right now, light bar flashing, in a Savannah PD patrol unit driven by Officer Douglas SAE. Paul Patton had no particular reason to be at the Coastal Parkway that Saturday. No errand, no appointment, no one waiting on him. Just the specific kind of restlessness that builds up over a long work week and can only be walked off somewhere that has water in it. He'd grabbed a sandwich from the deli on Drayton, tossed it on the passenger seat, and driven south with the windows down and no destination firmer than somewhere quiet. He found it at the parkway. He always did. He parked along the grass verge, cut the engine, and sat for a moment listening to the coastal air move through the car. The sky was doing something interesting, not raining yet, not quite threatening, but building. Layers of gray stacking up over the Atlantic like a slow argument, the light beneath them going flat and silver. Paul had always liked that particular kind of sky. Something honest about it. She laughed and launched into the thing she'd been texting him about. Something involving their cousin Marcus and a used car that was already clearly a mistake. And Paul half listened and half watched the water and felt, for approximately 4 more minutes, like a man with nothing pressing on him. The weekend stretching out. The storm still far enough away to ignore. His hands wrapped around his phone, clean and unbroken. For minutes. Then he heard the crash. It wasn't loud. That was the thing nobody who wasn't there would ever quite understand. It wasn't a movie explosion or a thunderclap. It was a dense, structural crunch. The sound of a vehicle's frame folding against physics it wasn't designed to survive. Followed immediately by the tinkling collapse of glass and then a silence that lasted exactly 1 second before it was filled with something worse. A child screaming. Paul's phone was in the grass before he knew he'd dropped it. Kezia's voice still coming out of the speaker, tiny and distant. "Paul? Paul, what was that?" And he was already moving, his legs pulling from somewhere older than thought, the sprinter's muscle memory firing without permission. The white Ford SUV was 40 yards up the access road, on its side in the grass embankment, driver's door folded inward like a crushed can. A pickup truck, dark, moving fast, was already fishtailing out of the far end of the lot. Hit and run. Here and then gone. Paul registered it without storing it, his eyes locking onto the SUV, onto the smoke beginning to push in thin threads from the crumpled hood, onto the rear passenger window where a small figure was visible, suspended sideways, a child strapped into a booster seat with her whole body straining against the belt. He covered the distance without feeling his feet touch the ground. A woman was already at the driver's side, both hands on the door handle, pulling with everything she had, her voice breaking apart. "Emma, Emma, baby, Mama's here. I can't. It won't open." The frame had buckled on impact, killing the power locks, sealing every door shut. The smoke through the vents was getting darker. Paul reached the car and put his hand on the rear door handle. It didn't move. He tried the other side, also jammed. The smoke curling through the dashboard vents was thickening now, going from white to a dirty gray, and Emma's coughing was cutting through her screaming in short, desperate bursts. Paul could see her face clearly through the rear window, eyes wide and locked on him, cheeks soaked, small chest heaving. 8 years old and holding on by a thread. Paul unzipped his hoodie and wrapped the sleeve tight around his right fist. He hit the rear passenger window once. The glass starred, held. Twice. A fracture line spread from the impact point like a crack in ice. He didn't wait. Third hit. Fourth. On the fifth, the window gave, not dramatically, not like the movies, but in a sudden, definitive collapse inward, a cascade of pebbled glass across the interior, and Paul was already reaching through before the last piece settled. The window channel caught him on the way in. He felt it open his forearm in a long, clean line and registered it the way you register whether noted, filed, irrelevant. His fingers found the seatbelt buckle. The metal was hot enough to sting. He pressed the release and felt the belt snap free. "I've got you," he said, his voice going through the window frame, as level as he could make it. "Arms around my neck. Ready?" Emma Cole nodded. Then she reached for him. Paul got his hands under her arms and pulled. The window frame dragged across his shoulders, his forearms, the back of both hands. He stumbled backward onto the grass and went down on one knee with her pressed against his chest. And he held on, and she held on harder, her small fingers locked behind his neck like she intended to stay there permanently. Behind them, the undercarriage caught. The flame was quiet at first, just a low, crawling orange along the grass beneath the fuel line, and then it wasn't quiet at all. Black smoke rolled skyward in a single furious column. The interior of the SUV, the booster seat, the air Emma had been breathing 30 seconds ago, all of it disappeared into fire. Paul sat on the coastal grass with a child on his chest and blood running freely down both arms and didn't move. Officer Douglas SAE had been 2 blocks away when the call came through. Vehicle accident, possible fire, Coastal Parkway access road. Routine enough. He ran the lights, made the turn, and pulled into the lot with the particular unhurried authority of a man who has arrived at scenes like this 100 times and already knows what he's going to find. He did not know what he was going to find. He scanned through the windshield as he rolled in. Overturned SUV? Confirmed. Fire department already on scene? Confirmed. Crowd of bystanders on the grass. A woman kneeling with a child wrapped around her. Paramedic working on someone seated. All of it registered, processed, cataloged in the 2 seconds before he pulled the parking brake. Then his eyes found Paul. A black man in a blue hoodie, broad-shouldered, sitting upright in the grass at the center of everything. A small white girl pressed against his chest, his arms around her, the child's face buried in his neck. Blood visible on both forearms. The burned-out SUV behind him still smoking. The crowd around him watching. Something shifted behind SAE's eyes. Not alarm exactly. Not fear. Something more practiced than either of those things, a categorization, a sorting, a conclusion drawn in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the way a man reaches for something he's reached for so many times it no longer feels like a choice. His hand moved to his radio before his door was fully open. Before he had spoken to a single witness. Before he had looked at the shattered window, or the paramedic working on Paul's hands, or Carol Cole pointing and saying that man saved my daughter in a voice loud enough to carry across the entire lot. His boots hit the grass. His mind was already made up. SAE crossed the grass with his hand already moving to his belt. Not the radio this time. The other side. "Sir. Stand up. Hands where I can see them." Paul looked up from his hands. His shredded, bleeding, wrapped in gauze hands that the paramedic was still working on. and for a moment he simply didn't understand what was happening. The words were English. The tone was unmistakable. But the combination here now didn't compute. "Officer, that man saved my daughter." Carol Cole was on her feet, her voice cracking with a different kind of urgency now. He pulled her out of the car. He broke the window with his bare hands. "What are you?" "Ma'am, step back." "He's the one who—" "Step back." A man in a green jacket took a step forward from the crowd. "I saw the whole thing." He ran from the parking lot. The doors were jammed. He punched through the glass. SAE's eyes moved to him with a flatness that stopped the sentence cold. Two other witnesses tried anyway. Same look. Same silence. SAE reached down and closed his hand around Paul's arm. "I'm going to need you to stand up and turn around." Paul stood. Slowly, carefully, in the way a man stands when he understands that speed itself will be misread. He turned. He felt his wrists taken from behind, felt the gauze the paramedic had just applied press into raw flesh as his arms were pulled back, felt the zip of metal and the click that meant it was done. The hood. SAE grabbed it from behind and pulled it up over Paul's head, forward over his face. "Paul!" Emma's voice came from somewhere behind him. Small, piercing, terrified in a completely different way than she had been in the car. "Paul, no. He didn't do anything. He saved me." Somewhere in the crowd, a phone came up, then another, then a third. The first video went up at 4:17 p.m., 17 seconds of shaky footage shot from 30 feet away. A black man in a blue hoodie being walked across coastal grass in handcuffs, while a little girl in a pink shirt screamed his name and her mother stood with both hands pressed to her mouth. No context needed. The image explained itself. By 6 p.m. it had 200,000 views. By 9 p.m., 2 million. By midnight, 14 million and climbing, and the number had stopped matching because it was everywhere. Every platform, every feed, every breaking news ticker from Atlanta to Seattle. 3 separate videos had surfaced by then, each from a different angle, each capturing the same unbearable sequence. A child reaching for the man being taken away. A crowd of witnesses being waved back. A paramedic standing frozen with bloody gauze still in her hands. Carol Cole posted her thread at 7 p.m. from the hospital waiting room where Emma was being checked for smoke inhalation. 11 tweets. No anger at first, just facts delivered in the flat, exhausted tone of a woman still in shock. "His name is Paul Patton. He heard my daughter screaming and he ran toward the car. He broke the window with his fist. He pulled her out. And then they arrested him." The 11th tweet simply read, "Someone please help us find him." It was retweeted 400,000 times before she fell asleep in the chair beside Emma's bed. #FreePatton and #ArrestTheCop began trending simultaneously before 10 p.m. and held for 72 hours straight. By morning, the Savannah Police Department's phone lines were overwhelmed. At noon the following day, Chief Raymond Garrett issued a statement confirming that an individual had been detained for questioning in connection with the incident, and that the department stood fully behind its officers' discretion in the field. It was the single worst paragraph anyone in Savannah had read in years. By nightfall, it had made everything considerably worse. Diana Reeves did not chase cases. In 22 years of civil rights law, she had built the kind of reputation that meant cases found her. Forwarded by colleagues, flagged by advocacy organizations, dropped into her inbox by people who had exhausted every other option. She was 51 years old, Atlanta-based, and had won 7-figure verdicts in 4 different states. She did not take every case she was offered. She took the ones that needed to be taken. She called Paul Patton 41 hours after the arrest. He was home by then, released without charges and without apology. His forearms in fresh bandages and his phone ringing so constantly he'd turned it face down on the kitchen table and left it there. He almost didn't answer when it rang again. He answered because the area code was unfamiliar. She spoke for 4 minutes. She told him what she'd seen in the videos, what she believed had occurred, and what she believed could be proven. She told him she would not promise him easy and she would not promise him fast, but she would promise him thorough. Paul sat at his kitchen table and listened and said almost nothing until she was done. "When can you start?" he asked. She already had. Her investigators had pulled SAE's personnel file within hours of the arrest going public, working a network of sources built over 2 decades. What they found was not a rogue officer who had made a single terrible error. What they found was a pattern, documented and suppressed and documented again. 2 formal complaints from black men stopped without cause in the previous 3 years. Both complaints filed, both quietly buried before reaching review. A use-of-force incident in 2021 that resulted in a 3-day suspension and a note in his file from a supervising sergeant that described SAE as aggressive but effective. Effective. The word sat in Diana Reeves' notes circled twice in red ink. She was going to enjoy this trial. The trial lasted 4 days. Diana Reeves had built her case the way she built all her cases. Methodically, without theatrics, laying one stone on top of another until the structure could not be knocked down. She called the paramedic who had been wrapping Paul's hands when SAE arrived. She called the man in the green jacket whose testimony SAE had dismissed on the grass. She called a use-of-force expert who walked the jury through SAE's personnel history with the unhurried precision of someone reading a medical chart. SAE's defense was instinct, training, a chaotic scene, and a split-second judgment call made under pressure. His attorney used the word professional 11 times in opening arguments. Reeves let them build the whole structure. Then she played the body cam footage. The courtroom had heard portions already, the arrival, the arrest, the voices of witnesses being waved back. But on the morning of the 4th day, Reeves played the audio from the moment SAE turned into the parking lot. Before he opened his door, before his boots touched the grass. His voice, flat and certain, coming through the cruiser's radio system while the SUV was still burning in the background. "Got a black male in a hoodie, has a child, doesn't look right. I'm going to make contact." No witness had been interviewed, no evidence examined. No name, no context, no question asked of anyone present. 14 seconds after pulling into the lot, Douglas SAE had already reached his conclusion. The jury went very still. Paul testified that afternoon. He sat in the witness box in a gray suit and spoke in a voice so quiet the room had to lean toward him. He described the window, the glass, Emma's arms around his neck. He described the sound the handcuffs made. He did not cry. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Paul sat in a hallway outside the courtroom on a wooden bench and stared at the floor and did not check his phone. Diana Reeves sat beside him for the first 2 hours, then stepped away to make calls, then came back. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much left to say. The foreperson read the verdict at 3:40 p.m. on a Thursday. $8.8 million. Paul heard the number and felt something move through him that wasn't quite joy and wasn't quite relief but existed somewhere in the territory between them. A deep, structural settling, like a building that has been leaning for years finally finding its foundation. Beside him, Diana Reeves allowed herself a single, quiet exhale. Douglas SAE was terminated from the Savannah Police Department the following morning. A criminal indictment for civil rights violations followed 3 weeks later. The state licensing board moved to permanently revoke his certification, and the language in the order was unambiguous. He would not work in law enforcement again. Not in Georgia. Not anywhere. The Savannah PD entered a federal consent decree in the spring. Mandatory retraining, independent oversight, a new use-of-force review process. Chief Garrett announced his early retirement in the same press release. Nobody was particularly surprised. Paul announced the park on a Tuesday, no press conference, just a post with a single photograph. The coastal grass. The water behind it. A rendering of a children's playground where the scorched outline of the SUV had once been. He called it Emma's Field. On a gray October morning, almost exactly 1 year after the afternoon that changed everything, Paul Patton stood on that same grass in the same blue hoodie and pressed a shovel into the ground. Emma Cole, 9 years old now, stood beside him with her small hands wrapped around the handle. She had refused to let anyone else break the first earth. And where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments right now. I read every single one, and on a story like this, I need to know who was in the room with me. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sitting with this story all the way to the end, because stories like Paul Patton's don't get easier as they go. They get heavier and they ask something of you, and the fact that you stayed says something about who you are. Thank you for caring. In a world that moves fast and forgets faster, caring is an act of resistance. Paul Patton's name deserves to be remembered. Emma's Field deserves to exist in more than a court settlement. It deserves to live in the minds of people who understand what it cost to build it. Thank you for believing that heroes, regardless of what they look like, regardless of what they're wearing, regardless of what assumptions arrive before they do, deserve to be treated like heroes. That belief is not a small thing. That belief is the whole fight. Stay safe. Stay vigilant. Stay honest about what you see and what you refuse to unsee. And always, always, run toward the fire when someone needs help. Don't calculate it. Don't weigh the risk against the reward or look around to see who else is moving first. Just run. Because that's what heroes do. Not because they were trained to. Not because someone was watching. But because a child was screaming and there was no one else close enough and their legs remembered how. That's what Paul Patton did. That's what heroes do. And that's the kind of world worth building. One act of courage, one broken window, one child carried to safety at a time.